Good afternoon, everybody. It is September 1st, 12:30. We're here for a council working session. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Presentation items, I don't see any. So we're just going to move right on to item number 1. Approve allocation of surplus undesignated funds. And we're going to open the floor with Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see we've got this whole list as to be recommended. I would suggest that we divide these up individually because of some concerns that some folks that I've been talking to, and I'm also reminded that when we'd had the, May, June, get together about what we were going to be approving on, and some of these numbers have changed since then, and some of these are I'm not comfortable with, and especially on the fire station number 1, I'm totally for it. However, the information I was provided with is that we're looking at the vision fund for the extra $5 million to come from the for the fire station number 1, and so with that new information that we've been provided, I would like to also add to the list to direct the. I can't do this as a direction, but as a recommendation that we direct the directors to come back with additional hazard pay for the other employees within the city that are eligible, because I know there's some other divisions within the city that would be eligible.
Councilman, I believe that's item 2 today on our agenda.
Is that an item 2? Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll discontinue that and carry on when item number 2 comes up. But anyway, that was my recommendation, that we divide these up individually, because we think we're taking a chance on voting all this as all or nothing, and my concern is it would be going down as nothing. So that's my suggestion and recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Darla Drew?
Thank you, Chair. I would echo Richie's sentiments on this. I would like to see these items broken out. Yes, maybe they were picked out of a list we made of things that we thought were priorities, but I would like to vote on each one individually and not as a group, and then be allowed to bring in some other things if we feel those are part of this surplus. So, and would be worthy of funding by the surplus. So I'm very unhappy with this list. I'd like to have it broken out and look at it again. So I agree with Richie. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Pat Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as fire station number 1, the $15 million, it seems like it's a bit of a roll of the dice for the vision fund money, because we won't know by Monday night when this goes to first reading if that money is going to be approved from the vision fund. Correct, or am I wrong?
That is correct.
Okay, so if we say, okay, fire station 1, $10 million, and maybe $5 million, depending on what the vision fund does, it puts that project on hold, because they can't move forward till they know how much money they're getting. They can't say, okay, let's build a $15 million facility, which they desperately need, with only $10 million, and then have to do a bake sale or something to try to make up the other $5 million. So it concerns me to take that money out and still expect them to be able to move forward with their planning. I don't have any problem with us addressing these items individually. May not be a bad idea, because we want to be very thorough, because this is a unique opportunity to have $20 million to spend on projects that without this money we would likely never ever be able to do most of these projects on here, most if not all. So I don't have any problem breaking them out. But the one for fire station number 1, that makes me very nervous to pull that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Evans?
I agree with my council members up here in that we should be able to vote on them independently of each other. I also am concerned about the $15 million for Fire Station 1, simply because that's 3/4 of all those funds. And I believe we're going to be, if we're creative, find some other funding sources to get that extra money we would need if we did reduce that amount there. I'm sure we haven't explored nearly all of the options we have for that, so I would also be in favor of separating them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Joel, can we direct staff to not put this on Monday night's agenda? Maybe we, if my colleagues agree, we can move it to a special working session to review it?
Yeah, I think you can continue it to a future meeting. It doesn't have to be discussed on Monday night.
Okay, thank you. That's the direction I think we should take with it.
Yep.
Moving on to item number 2,
Having a
reconsideration
Richie day.
of other city departments to receive hazard pay. Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, just to reiterate that I feel it's the responsibility, or should be the responsibility, not us, to figure out who the people that would be eligible for hazard pay. And if you recall, we got a very poignant letter from Director Tech about a consideration for the other individuals within his department. Now, the directors also know better who is eligible for the hazard pay and who isn't. So that's my recommendation, that we allow the directors to give us some guidance of who would be eligible, that would be eligible for the hazard pay outside of the folks that we've already awarded. That's my suggestion and recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Darla Drew.
Thank you. I have to echo the words of then President Laura Armstrong, who warned us about cherry picking, and she was right. And I understand why we chose the fire department and the police department. However, all the people in the city employ made sure our city ran through a very difficult time, whether they were working in HR or whether they were doing construction or whatever they were doing. It all made our city continue to run in a remarkable way during very hard times. So my suggestion would be that, and I know I was against this in the beginning, but I'd like to see all city employees receive the hazard pay, because without that, it seems like we're picking a favorite child. So that would be my recommendation. I guess we'll fight it out on Monday, but that's what I'm going to, I don't know who would pick out who's going to get hazard pay. You know, I mean, it should be an all or nothing. So let's look at this, whether it's landfill people. We had a lot of folks really step up when others couldn't. Some of their comrades fell ill. They were still there making sure our city ran. So they need a thank you, and I would like to reconsider this for giving it to everyone. So that'll be my recommendation also on Tuesday night. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Pat Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I couldn't agree more with Alderman Nordstrom. If we all think back to the way this whole thing happened, the fire chief and the police chief wrote a very poignant, direct letter requesting hazard pay for their staff. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on it. And that's what started the process. No one sitting up at this table said, hey, let's throw some hazard pay out there and see what happens with it. So I think if there are departments who believe that they should receive hazard pay, I would love to hear from them. At our last meeting, when members from our sanitation landfill department were here and gave their speech to us, which was excellent, they threw my name in there and they said they're going to hold Councilman Pat Jones to his word of giving us money if, you know, we deserve it, or if it not deserve it, but y'all remember what you said. You said my name and I kind of, So, you know, if you're going to hold me responsible, A, that's a great idea because I'm very worth holding. And secondly, we need to follow, in my opinion, we need to follow that same process. You know, I firmly believe that your department deserves it. You know, what the stuff that was going on within the sanitation department and our landfill and everything during a time of medical and viral unknowns, you know, was putting you folks at tremendous hazard. And the word hazard fits here just like it does with our police and fire. So I would love to consider something, but I would also love to see a request in the same manner that came to us from the police and fire department, that we could consider and act on, rather than just dialogue it out and have it maybe one of the ones that we move forward with. Because if we do it, which I think we should do, we need to have a good process to follow and a reason why that we can explain to the taxpayers, here's why we did this. I'm very comfortable talking to any taxpayer who asks me, why did you give the police and fire department and our emergency responders hazard pay? And I have no problem explaining that to them. Some agree, some don't, and that's fine. But I have no problem explaining it and agreeing with it because I think it was the right thing to do. To take the next step, I would like to see that come from whatever departments believe that they should be on the receiving end of that, so we have something to act on. So if you folks would like to sit down with me and talk about it, let me know, and I'd love to sit down and visit with you, or your department head, or however you want to do it. But I encourage you to do that, because that process worked. That process made us talk about it. It made us look at all the options. It made us look at why we should, why we shouldn't, and all these other things that we've talked about. But the process matters, and the process worked, in my opinion. So that's what I would encourage to take place for any of our departments who believe that they should be on the receiving end of hazard pay. Thank you.
Mr. Tech, question for you if you don't mind. You did just that, is that correct? You sent out an email that...
That is
I'm not mistaken.
correct. I sent correspondence to the entire council to that effect.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Strout, you wanted to say something. Could you provide some clarity on how this would work for...
Sure.
There's no attachments.
And I thank you, Mr. President. Just to kind of clarify how we got here, the original request was from me in May at our special council meeting to discuss just what item number 1 is, the divvying up of the COVID money. And the request was for all employees. And so I feel like I made a request for all the department directors because we were all in this together. And the reason we decided to go with all the employees is just what Councilwoman Drew said. As we started limiting out who should receive this, it got to be a very slippery slope, because at first we said, this, for example, maybe just cops and firefighters. Well, what about their support staff? They're interacting with them every day. They're making sure that they can do that. And so we say, okay, support staff. Well, what about our sanitation workers? Absolutely, let's do that. Well, what about the support staff for the sanitation workers? And it just kept getting growing and growing and growing to where it seemed like we were going to be giving it to everyone except a very tiny slice of our workforce, and it just didn't sit right. And I won't speak for the rest of the directors, but it didn't sit right with me and the mayor. So that's how we went forward with this original plan. I think that was sometime in early May. And then Chief Culberson and Chief Hedrick then wrote a letter in response to the inaction of the council, reminding them that this is still a request and this is still out there. And then Director Tech wrote a letter too, and I have no doubt that all the rest of the directors, if asked, would advocate for their employees because they are good at what they do, and that's part of being a responsible leader. So for my opinion, I agree with Councilwoman Drew. I think that we have a mechanism in place. We already have an ask, and that's my recommendation for Tuesday, and I'll say the same thing there. So I appreciate the time to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Strout. Mr. Evans, and then Darla will get back to you.
Well, I just want to point out that I'm not opposed to people that actually put themselves in harm's way, receive some kind of bonus, but I think we have certain models out there already in the military that show who receives hazard pay and who does not, combat pay and who does not. When we go to, and Mr. Nordstrom, I'll ask you this question since you have a military background. When we're fighting in Iraq, does everybody working at the Pentagon receive combat pay?
Mr. Chair,
Of course.
I can't answer the question about Iraq. I was in Vietnam, so I can address that question if you desire an answer.
I mean, I just assume if you're not deployed, if you're not actually in combat, you're not receiving that hazard bonus.
Yeah, when I was in Nam, yeah, we received extra pay for that.
Okay, you
combat
did,
pay.
but were the people back in the United States who were not deployed,
That'd be correct, yes.
they did not?
That'd be correct.
Okay. Well, and so I think we got to look at this from the perspective also that we were lucky enough in this town that we did not have to lay off a percentage of our employees. And they were blessed that we had the money to make a payroll and keep everybody on their job. And that's something you have to consider when there's thousands of people around this town that may not feel they were treated so well. So you have to factor that in as well, because I've never, aside from the police and fire people, I haven't received any letters saying you got to give all these people pay. But I have received a lot of them saying, why do they deserve it? I didn't get it from doing my job. And so we have to also take into consideration that people stayed gainfully employed during this whole time. That's a major consideration. And so we got to start counting our blessings rather than always looking at the dark side of this. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Ms. Drew?
Thank you. Well, last year was unusual times. You know, it wasn't a war, but it could have been, and, you know, if how you look at it, how people survived. But when I see, you know, people that were working at our front finance desk downstairs, they were taking a lot of abuse. We took it one night or two nights a month, and it was hard. But I can't imagine being in one of these positions and taking that day after day after day, because they did. You know, and you didn't have to be on the front line in your public works department to get those bad phone calls, because people were angry and they were looking for scapegoats. And the people that worked for the city had to take that a lot. And so I think that we could do it across the board. It was an unusual year. It was a tough year. But I'll tell you what, sitting here 2 nights out of the month and having the abuse thrown at us that we did, I know you guys out in the field, in this building, wherever you worked, you took it every day. So that's why I would say, maybe it's not hazard pay, maybe it's just putting up with the things that happened every day, and you didn't leave your jobs. Because a lot of people left their jobs, but our folks did not leave their jobs. So let's just say thank you to everyone. I think it's apt, it's appropriate, and the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Mr. Stroud, I have one more question, if I may. The original proposal was a $1,000 hazard pay check for first responders and then $500 for remaining city staff. Would that be what we would be voting on Tuesday night, or how is this going to be drafted?
I have no idea. I mean, that was my original proposal, and I know we did move forward with $1,000 for our public safety employees. I didn't have a recommendation for the rest of the employees, but $500 was sort of the agreed upon at the time in May with the mayor and some of the rest of the directors. So, but as far as an updated ask, I don't have one.
Okay, thank you, sir. On to item number 3 and 4, City Attorney's Office. Robin, are you going to be able to handle these? Oh, here comes Joel. Oh, Carla, please.
Item number 3 is I believe, it's the proposed ordinance for the licensing of medical cannabis establishments. Staff we had a working session with 6 of the council members a few weeks ago. We took that along with what we had been looking at the state level and in other cities to draft this ordinance that would basically license all 4 kinds of medical cannabis establishments, establish a procedure for them to apply, to then go to the state for their registration, and then to come back and get their annual license, to establish a method of renewing those licenses, suspending and revoking them if we have a problem. And then the ordinance also imposes some requirements on the different types of establishments. I'm sure willing to take any questions or.
Mr. Nordstrom?
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Cushman, we talked about 15 licenses. Is that total, or is that 15 per category? Meaning, go ahead.
We had really been talking about limits on the number of dispensaries. So the ordinance as written today would put that limit on dispensaries of 1 per 5,000, which gets us to the 15 that the council at that working session had discussed. The draft today doesn't have any limits on other kinds of businesses. It's our belief, after looking at how other communities have dealt with this, that the cost to establish cultivation and manufacturing and testing are pretty high. Those are pretty big enterprises, and we're not really that concerned about the number becoming a problem.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Mr. Jones?
Thank you very much. I appreciate what has taken place through the city attorney's office and the work sessions. I was at one of them, but I wasn't able to be at the other one because of work. But I appreciate everything that was done, the discussion that's taken place on how to get to this number. So well done to everyone that was involved in that. I've made this comment every time we've had meetings about this, and I will make it again since we are getting so close to a vote Monday night. This, whatever the number is going to be, looks like it's likely it's going to be 15 for medical marijuana. This is a shroud, a facade, a mask of what is going to be next, and that is recreational marijuana. If the Supreme Court decides that it's legal, every single place that has a medical marijuana license in a puff of smoke is going to want to become a recreational place. So as we sit here and discuss medical marijuana and the importance of it and the need of it for those who have certain needs and that the voters have approved it, that's fine. But we need to be eyes wide open that wherever these places show up in our community as medical marijuana, medical cannabis places, they're going to turn into recreational marijuana sales spots, and we need to be aware of the impact that that's going to have throughout our community, because this is just the first step in order to turn places into recreational marijuana. And I want us to continue to be aware of that, because the dominoes will continue to fall. We're stacking them up right now, but the dominoes will continue to fall once all of this happens. So it's legal, and it's, you know, we will approve it because we have to, but I ask everyone to be aware of what's going to take place now and watch what happens as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Drew?
As the people of South Dakota voted for recreational marijuana as well as medical marijuana, I see no problem with these evolving into that as it is legal. And I think we'll see that happen. And it doesn't give me any heartburn. I think we'll have zones for these areas that will allow medical marijuana dispensaries in. Is that correct? Yes, and Vicki is shaking her head. Yes, do you want to elaborate on that, please?
Mr. President?
Of course.
So we did have a working session on that also. There are going to be specific zoning districts that would allow each of the 4 uses. Within each of those designations, then, if they can meet separation, it could be a permitted use for a dispensary. A cultivation and manufacturing will always be a conditional use. But we, too, when looking at this, to realize that this is for a medical cannabis dispensary, and at some point those might open up and have recreational facilities involved in them as well. We ensured that the setbacks to those types of uses that could be impacted by that are being looked at even for the medical cannabis dispensary. So we think we are ahead of the game. If that should come forward, I don't believe from a zoning perspective we've left much out, but we can always make amendments if we see that we have.
Thank you so much for that very clear answer. Also, I've heard some rumblings that some council members might think $5,000 is too high, that it'll exclude the little guys. Believe me, I'm not a person of means, but I could come up with $5,000 if I wanted a medical marijuana license. So I'm thinking that I would like to see it stay at the $5,000, and just to make sure that they're serious, and I know they'll have background checks and things like that, just like getting a liquor license. So I think we'd be cutting ourselves short if suddenly we say, oh, it can be $1,000 for you because you don't really have that much money. That would set up a bad precedent in my mind. So I just think it should be clear, $5,000, certain zones, and 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Mr. Evans?
Well, I'm going to keep like a fly buzzing around your head, irritating you, saying what I've been saying for the last 8 or 9 months about this. We just had a talk last night about new funding sources, generating more income, not relying on the sales tax so much, and the mayor talked about that same thing a couple weeks ago. I still say we should try as hard as we can till the legislature forbids it to make these city-owned dispensaries, so we collect not only the tax of it, but the profit, which could amount to several tens of millions of dollars over the next, well, if it really goes recreational. And that would fill a lot of chuck holes. So I don't want to have people saying, well, we got to find new funding sources, and then giving up hope on this very one that seems so obvious to me to generate a lot of money right away. So I'm going to keep bringing that up. Thank you.
Mr. Evans, Ms. Drew?
Sorry, Councilman Evans. I am for the free market. I'd like to see that we have 15 here, and may the best man or woman win. And to take it over would seem like an overreach of the city power, so I'm going to just have to agree to disagree with you.
Well, then I'll respond to that, since you responded to me. So you believe in raising taxes then. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Very briefly, if we were to do what Mr. Evans is talking about, I would suggest that instead of calling them chuck holes, we call them potholes. Thank you.
Item number 4. Joel, she pointed at you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just an ordinance that's implementing the recommendations from last year for the Human Relations Commission, MOA. The group has been meeting now for this year, and they've been discussing the ordinance changes, and also we're looking still at bylaws. There's been a little, I guess, slowdown with the transition from Jess. I've kind of taken over being the primary staff support for that. So decided it was time to we're halfway through 2021 to bring these forward. So really all we're doing is removing some of the stuff that was no longer relevant. As you're aware, the recommendations were to move away from the kind of formal adjudicatory process and go into a more informal mediation, providing a forum for people with issues to sit down and try to talk and learn. And actually we had our first mediation on Monday night, and it actually went pretty well. So hopeful for the future. Again, the group's been meeting, so again, the ordinance was really just to try to simplify and get down to the core things and take out, there was a lot of stuff that dealt with the adjudicatory process and the hearings and things, and since we moved away from that, we removed a lot of those items.
Thank you, Joel. Now on to the police department items. Captain Johns.
Mr. President, item number 5 is the acceptance of additional Project Safe Neighborhood grant funding. This is a continuation of a grant that we've been participating in since 2018. We've seen great results through our collaborative efforts with our federal partners under this grant.
Item 6 is the same.
Correct.
Okay. Questions from my colleagues? Item 7 is just a reappointment from the mayor's office. Tracy, would you like to handle finance department 8 through 12?
Sure. 8 is some additional volunteers for work comp. 9 is our June sales tax report, and again, we are very pleased. It is 23% up over the same period last year. Item 10 is to surplus an ambulance that will be traded in. Item 11 is the general fund sales tax for July. Looks like the undesignated balance at the end of July is $26 million. And item 12 is our unclaimed property that we're required to send to the state each year. These are checks that did not get cashed by anyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Tech, items 13 through 24, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to break these up into appropriate groups. Items 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 21, and 22
are all project change orders. There's a number of final change orders, which means the project's been closed out. And then I believe there are 2 in there for projects that are currently underway. Nothing extraordinary about any of those change orders, standard course of business. Item 15, I'm going to group with item number 24, and that's a sidewalk variance. The first one's along Tanager Drive, which is a rural road section, as well as item 24, East Highway 44. Once again, another rural road section. Staff recommends approval of those sidewalk variances. And then item 20 is our annual purchase of garbage and recycling containers as the community grows, as well as just regular wear and tear on our curbside pickup containers. We have to replace a number of them annually, so this is our annual purchase for those types of containers. And then last but not least is item 19, which is the most significant item we have on today's agenda. And that revolves around our water reclamation facility. Let me give you a little background first. Our water reclamation facility originally went online in 1967 with what we call a standard or conventional treatment process. That plant served it still serves us today, actually. Many improvements have been made there over the years. In 2002, an expansion to our water reclamation facility took place, and once again, that added capacity, a different type of treatment system or technology, if you will, and that served us well. In the year 2016, we commissioned what's called a facilities plan. That identified our roadmap to the future where we need to go with our water reclamation facility. So it identified improvements to take us into the next generation, if you will. The north plant, we call it, the old part of it that was originally built in '67 is worn out, needs to be replaced, and we would replace it or expand actually what we call the south plant, or what was built in 2002. So to cut to the chase, this item in front of you today is a resolution of support for the City of Rapid City to make application to it's called the State Facility Plan. And what that will do is open up funding for us to be able to go after projects that we identified in 2016 over about the course of the next 11, 12 years to make improvements to our water reclamation facility. There's been a lot of additional funding available that will be coming available to the state, just as it did to the city through ARPA funds. I believe the infrastructure bill that will be coming will also allow opportunities for the city to leverage our projects with those federal funds. So this item in front of you today is just a resolution of support for us to apply. It does not obligate the city to spend any money or to enter into any sort of debt. So this is a great thing for our community. It's looking towards the future, and we're excited about it.
Thank you, Mr. Tech. Mr. Nordstrom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tech, I apologize. I didn't get a chance to communicate with you. I'm looking at the CIP items. Just in case I didn't or did miss it, is there any one of these? It looks like they're all increase or decrease, which is okay. Is there any new ones that are on this list? The first time we're going to be seeing this?
Well, no, all of these projects you've seen before in front of you. They're all have gone through our standard process of design council awarding contracts for design effort, authorization to bid, awarding the bid. So no, none of these projects are new.
Very good, thank you. And then I can't say anything but good luck, best wishes. Everything else on the water reclamation facility it's good to be looking forward into the future on that. Lots of challenges out there. Thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Well, a few weeks ago, thank you. A few weeks ago at a West Boulevard Association meeting, I was cornered by Mr. Dave Holland, who heads that group. As it turns out, he is a concerned citizen who actually plans water systems all around the world, traveling to Africa regularly. He is a consultant for cities around the area, like Fort Collins and some other. I think he'd like to be included in the discussions, because I think he brings some fresh ideas. And we maybe need to, I don't know if you've ever had contact with him, but I think he brings in some valuable insight, because he does this, frankly, globally. So I think we need to access this as a community resource. So,
Mr. Tech?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I do know Dave Holland quite well. He works for a competitor of the firm that we hired to do the work. I would consider the firm we hired to be certainly experts in the field, but I'd be happy to visit with Mr. Holland about his take on things.
just because he works for a competitor doesn't mean he can't bring good ideas to the city. This nepotistic thing we have going where we work with these people and always did, I don't necessarily like that idea, because just because we work with certain people doesn't mean they're bringing the best option to us. So I want to include everybody's input in this. So I stand by what I said before. Thank you.
Seeing no more questions for Mr. Tech, Community Development.
Yeah, so this is our yearly report of the Transportation Improvement Program, final draft, and Kip Harrington is here to give you a brief summation.
Good afternoon. This is the Transportation Improvement Program for the years 2022 through 2025. The Transportation Improvement Program, or also known as the TIP, lays out all of the various transportation projects throughout the metropolitan planning area, which includes Rapid City, Box Elder, Somerset, Piedmont, and portions of Pennington and Meade counties. So this lays out all the roadway projects sponsored by the DOT, by the City of Rapid City, by the City of Box Elder, and by those counties of Meade and Pennington. It also includes airport projects and public transit projects as well. Gives you the time frame of the projects, details on the projects, and also the funding sources. Again, this is a product we bring every year in front of you just to let you know what's coming up in the transportation world, keep you abreast of any large construction projects that'll be upcoming. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I don't think my colleagues have any.
Okay, thank you.
Item 26, 27 are second readings. Public comment. I didn't have anything turned into me. So we'll open and close that, and this meeting's adjourned.